Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In all this, but they've not talked themselves until tonight. Their support minimal, their crimes and violence repugnant to the vast majority. But Brexit and the border now demand that the IRA faces scrutiny. We're in an IRA safe house in the Irish Republic.
We are the IRA as reconstituted in 2012. There is only one such organisation, and I've been mandated by the Army Council to speak to you on their behalf.
The interview happened at an undisclosed location on condition of anonymity. His words are therefore spoken by an actor. This group, labelled by the media the new IRA, is the strongest and most violent of the dissident Republican groups.
If Brexit means any kind of infrastructure put in on the Irish border, what would the response of the IRA be to that?
First of all, there's no such thing as an Irish border, it's a British border. And since its formation, since its inception, the purpose of the IRA has been to take action against all such infrastructure of British occupation.
When you say take action, the IRA would take action against such infrastructure. Tell us what you mean.
The IRA is an army, and as an army, we're committed to armed struggle for political and social change. And bearing that in mind, any installation or aspects of British occupation within 6 counties, be it at the border or elsewhere, any infrastructure would be a legitimate target for attack and armed actions against those infrastructures and against the people who are manning them.
When you say legitimate targets and legitimate actions, just to be absolutely clear, you're talking about attacking things physically, you're talking about bombings, you're talking about shootings.
Yes, it's important to understand that this is a country under occupation by Britain. And as in any colonial situation, the people have the right there to respond by all means necessary to that occupation.
If we arrived at a situation, for instance, where there was the so-called backstop and a border in the Irish Sea, would that presumably be a more acceptable situation to the IRA?
I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying here. Regardless of the form of occupation, whatever kind of border there is, be it soft or so-called hard border, that's irrelevant. We're talking about an illegal occupation here. That means the IRA reserves the right to attack those who are upholding that illegal occupation along the border and elsewhere, and the illegal partition that goes with it, and those who are upholding that. The EU, the British, and the 26 county administration constantly speak about the border as if it's only been there 2 minutes, and it's only an issue with Brexit. There's been a border there since 1921. It's been resisted. It's being resisted, and it will be resisted regardless of any deal formed around it by those who have capitalist interest at heart, or indeed, if there is no deal at all.
The IRA's message unequivocal, unambiguous to Brussels, London, Dublin and beyond. Hard or soft border, deal or no deal, their war never ended. The Good Friday Agreement peace deal is a surrender.
That agreement was overwhelmingly supported by people north and south of the border in this island. How can it be a surrender?
First off, the Good Friday Agreement is dead. We're superseded by various other agreements such as the Leeds Castle, St Andrews, Hillsborough and others. So the Good Friday Agreement is defunct.
These Republicans dubbed the new IRA, assessed by security forces as the largest dissident group. For instance, detonating this car bomb outside the courthouse in Derry earlier this year. But their support is minimal.
So to those who say, and there are so many of them, that you are a tiny minority, you don't enjoy any meaningful, relevant support in the community, and you're just the wrong side of history continuing with this, you say what?
On the contrary, we're not the wrong side of history. No colony has ever secured its freedom without armed resistance. We have more support than the Conservative Party has in Ireland, but they lord it over us. We also have more support in Ireland than the Labour Party does,
But we're not talking about those parties. Those are mainland Britain parties. We're talking about Sinn Féin. We're talking about the DUP. We're talking about Fine Gael. We're talking about Fianna Fáil. We're talking about Irish parties. They have support. You don't.
Well, this is the mainland of Ireland. The IRA is confident that it has popular support for its ultimate goal of a 32-county Irish republic. The political parties that you reference are silent about the armed activities of the state. So therefore, the IRA will take no lectures on morality or the futility of violence from those who remain morally in favour, if not tactically.
Then, April the 18th this year, rioting in the Cregan estate in Derry. One of this group's gunmen shot dead the journalist Lyra McKee, who was observing the violence.
Does the IRA say sorry?
Absolutely. We listened to calls from the Republican base at the time. We rightly called for the IRA to take responsibility for the tragic loss of Lyra McKee's life and to apologise. As we stated at the time, the loss of any civilian life in the conflict is a tragedy. We directly apologised at the time to her partner, her family and her friends, and on behalf of the IRA, I reiterate that apology now.
Let me put to you what Sarah Canning said to me, Lyra McKee's partner. She described the IRA as being like paedophiles. What she meant by that was, she said that you are responsible as an organisation for grooming young and vulnerable young people in places like Cregan and grooming them for violence. What do you make of that criticism?
Personally, I find that comparison is grotesque. Young people have always been the backbone of the Republican struggle. They bring an energy and a vibrancy to it with their activism. Young people are not sought out by the Republican movement. They seek it out.
People will watch this and they'll say the provisional IRA tried all this for a generation, 30 years or more, and they fought themselves to a standstill. It didn't work. They decided to go for a wholly political strategy. What makes you think for 1 second you can succeed where they failed?
It's important to point out, when you speak of the provisional IRA, that you assume that some of us had no experience of it. Many of our volunteers had lots of experience of the provisional IRA, top to bottom, from the Executive Council down to command staff, from brigade staff to the rank and file volunteers. That gives our organisation both a valuable insight now, and the benefit of hindsight as to why the provisional IRA failed in all its objectives. Whilst many volunteers have experience of that era, the majority of our volunteers in 2019 have no experience of that. In fact, many were born after 1998.
There is anecdotal evidence that this group is attracting young recruits, but a glimpse too from them that they recognise they're weak.
Republicanism has always gone through peaks and valleys, and at this point we remain heavily organised, and to paraphrase a phrase of our enemy, we are sophisticated and capable, and showing increased sophistication and ingenuity. But this is a period of consolidation and rebuilding. Rebuilding is important, but it's crucial to realise it doesn't reduce our operational capabilities.
The challenge laid down by the IRA over any Brexit border tonight comes just days after MI5 warned Boris Johnson not to put it to the test and inflame a war these people insist has never gone away.
Well, Alex is here with me now. Alex, this is a really controversial interview. Just take us through the sort of thought processes that lay behind it.
Yes, it obviously months in the planning, and all that time that elapsed, it became, in our view, editorially more and more relevant. It is fair to say our understanding is that because of high-level security briefings from people who are in the know, north and south, in the British and Irish states, their influence on not one but two Prime Ministers, Theresa May and Boris Johnson, has materially changed the prime ministerial course of negotiations during Brexit. That then gives you a real dilemma. The methodology of these people will be repugnant to many. They have almost no mandate to speak of. They are a tiny, tiny minority and are frankly hated by large numbers of people, north and south. That said, that is obvious. But the fact that they, because of their methodology and because of using violence, have become more relevant, if you like, to the Brexit negotiations and the whole border question. And that in itself, I think we would see it as a public interest argument to put it on. I don't mean that it's interesting to the public. I mean that there is, in a legal sense, a public interest methodology to see and to subject these people to a degree of scrutiny.
Well, let me just press you on that point of relevance, because you did challenge him on that in the interview. What is your assessment of how relevant the new IRA are now? Well,
my assessment and the assessment of security people who know a great deal about it more than I do would be it's nothing like, for instance, the strength of the provisionals, which were reckoned at 400 or 500 activists at the height of the Troubles. Nothing like that at all. But it is clear, and there is inescapable evidence, they have the ability to mount violent attacks, they have the ability to murder people, albeit in chaotic circumstances, with Lyra McKee, to put it mildly, in that riot on the 18th of April in Craig and in Derry. They are also clearly the technical capacity to build and detonate a car bomb. They are there, they are not going away, and if their presence, no matter how widely and without a mandate it may be, their presence exists and is playing a part in the Brexit music, that's relevant.
Indeed. Alex, thanks very much. Well, joining me now is Jonathan Powell, the chief government negotiator in the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. Just get your reaction first to that interview.
Well, this is a pathetic, irrelevant organisation that enjoys minimal political support. They're also militarily incompetent. They should just go away and give up. Unfortunately, they're being given oxygen by the Brexit process, and that's a mistake.
Well, just press you a bit on the claim that he made in that interview that any infrastructure, any border infrastructure, would be a legitimate target for attack. That is therefore a threat, isn't it?
Well, we've known for a while that they're threatened to attack any border that's put in place. Luckily, I think where the negotiations are heading now is towards the original backstop, which means that Northern Ireland remains in the customs union, remains in the single market, and there will be no customs border in Northern Ireland. I hope that's right. Well, I believe that's where that's going.
But as far as we know, I mean, it's difficult to know the details of the deal. There will be some customs checks. So any kind, that could be sort of unsettling for anyone there.
If there were to be customs checks, if there were to be a customs border, it would be a problem. And that is why the Chief Constable has said his officers will not protect those sites because of the danger of them being shot. And he's quite right to say that. I do hope that Boris Johnson has actually drawn the lesson. There should be no border checks, there should be no border here, and they won't have the incentive of having these things to attack.
I mean, as one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement, you heard him saying in that interview the Good Friday Agreement is dead. Do you personally fear an upsurge in violence, whatever comes out of the Brexit negotiation process?
No, this is an organisation made up with old lags like that who recruit young teenage boys to kill people or try to kill people. Luckily, they're incompetent. And luckily, they have no support and won't get any support unless a British government did something very stupid that I don't believe it will do. So, no, I don't think these people are really any threats to Good Friday Agreement. To be honest, the Brexit process is much more dangerous to the Good Friday Agreement than this organisation will ever be. Just listening to him, he doesn't even know the history of the Good Friday Agreement and what came of it. These are not people who have a serious political agenda and should not be taken seriously.
I mean, nevertheless, you know, in the last few years, there has been an upsurge of violence. I mean, obviously, what happened to Lyra McKee, but other instances as well. So that Brexit uncertainty, instability, is the genie out of the bottle, or can a deal sort of assuage people's concerns on that?
There is no doubt that the issue of Brexit has roiled the issue of identity about how people feel in Northern Ireland, whether they're British or Irish. That has been opened up. We saw it on Sunday with threats from the Loyalist, UVF, and stories about the UDA. All these names that we thought we weren't going to be hearing again are coming back because of this Brexit debate. And I do think it is essential that we do avoid a border in Northern Ireland, but I do believe that's what we're going to do.
So what is the best way then, post any kind of agreement, whatever comes out of those machinations in Brussels, what is the best way of moving forward and ensuring there isn't a return to the era of the Troubles?
The best way to try and solve this problem would be to try and put the mess of Brexit behind us, to try and rebuild British-Irish relations and try and settle down that issue of identity. Because we went to great lengths in the Good Friday Agreement all those years ago to try and find a solution where people could feel Irish or feel British or feel both in Northern Ireland. That was the point of the agreement. If we can get back to that, and if the issue of identity goes away again, then we will be in a much better place and groups like this can go back to wherever they came from.
Jonathan Powell, thanks very much for joining us. Now, it was a shocking and brutal attack on one of Northern Ireland's most senior business executives. Kevin Lunny, a director of a firm employing some 800 staff, was abducted near his home in County Fermanagh, taken across the border into the Republic and tortured. He survived, but with life-changing injuries. Yet despite a cross-border police investigation, no arrests have been made. It's the latest in a long line of attacks on executives at Mr. Lunny's company, with locals blaming a mafia-like network of organised criminals. With the border area now at the heart of the political debate, Porrick O'Brien has gone there to investigate.
Evening Mass in the tiny village of Kinawley, South Fermanagh. Prayers for a local businessman who was abducted and tortured.
I just can't comprehend that any human being would do that to another. You wouldn't do it to an animal.
A community in turmoil. A mafia-style gang said to be operating with impunity.
I am not prepared to speak and say who it was. Because
Why not?
It's too dangerous, too dangerous.
This is a story of brutality, betrayal, and the Northern Irish borderlands.
Mr. Lunny suffered life-changing injuries.
On the evening of the 17th of September, father of 6, Kevin Lunny, left work at Quinn Industrial Holdings, QIH, one of Northern Ireland's biggest and most well-known manufacturing conglomerates.
The place where Kevin Lunny was taken to.
As the company director drove up the small lane to his house, 2 cars boxed him in. He was abducted, brought across the border into the Republic of Ireland, and tortured. This is the area across the border in County Cavan where it's believed Kevin Lunny was taken. The attack was pre-planned. The authorities believe at least 10 people were involved. Locals we spoke to have a good idea who some of the men are. But we're too afraid to talk on camera. Not surprising, given the horrific details of what happened to Kevin Lunny. His leg was broken, his face was cut, and his company initials were carved into his chest.
QIH, was it?
QIH, yeah.
And that was cut into his chest?
Mm-hmm. I just can't comprehend that any human being would do that to another. I don't know. You wouldn't do it to an animal.
So this is the main substation that supplies into Northern Ireland.
Kevin Lunny's brother, also a director at QIH, shows us the wind farm the company once owned. His brother told him that he's convinced that someone was pulling the strings of the gang of thugs who abducted him.
It was organised and it was paid for?
Yes.
You're confident of that?
Yeah. These guys don't do anything for nothing. It was basically, I have this job to do this evening. There was no anger involved. It was, I have to do this evening, and you know, it was more or less, I have something else to do tomorrow evening.
I suppose, Tony, the big question is, why?
Let's put it bluntly, it's definitely connected to QAHL, and that's for certain.
The attack was carried out by people.
The Kevin Lunny attack, albeit the most violent, wasn't the first time a QIH boss was targeted. There have been over 70 examples of harassment, like this arson attack on a family member's car. A catalogue of abuse directed at QIH executives like John McCartan.
People shouting at me in the street, people meeting me face to face and carrying direct threats of blackmail, harm to my family, harm to my children specifically, harm to my father, then written threats delivered to our offices explicitly warning of our execution.
I was totally shocked and angry.
After the attack, the local parish priest took to the pulpit one Sunday and delivered an explosive sermon. He spoke of a powerful kingpin operating above the law in this seemingly tranquil rural community.
I now believe that there has been a mafia-style group with its own godfather operating in our region for some time behind the scenes. No one should be untouchable before the law.
Does everybody in this community know who you're talking about?
A lot of people would have a fair idea of who I was talking about.
Who were you talking about?
I am not prepared to speak and say who it was. Because
Why not?
It's too dangerous, too dangerous.
And so to the big questions. Who is the driving force behind the vendetta against QIH executives, and why? There's a complex history to all this. To start to get your head around it, you have to go back 46 years to this hole in the ground. A young farmer called Sean Quinn borrowed £100 from the bank, started digging gravel out of the family farm. From there diversified into cement, from there diversified into almost everything. Sean Quinn came to embody the aspiration, the true grit of the people who lived here. Hundreds of families, thousands of people relied on that business, and relied on that business in a place where opportunity and jobs did not previously exist. By the mid-2000s, Sean Quinn was the richest man in Ireland.
The headlines say it all.
But then, the financial crash. Quinn lost billions of euros in a failed financial bet on Anglo-Irish Bank shares. And by 2012, he was declared bankrupt. Sean Quinn will get his victory. There were pro-Quinn demonstrations in the area. There were protest songs. A couple of years later, a group of his executives tried to rebuild the company. Sean Quinn wanted back in, but was ultimately excluded. Along with others, felt he'd been stabbed in the back. By 2012, the intimidation of the new directors had begun in earnest, culminating in the abduction of Kevin Lunny, here in happier times with his old boss, Sean Quinn. Lunny is back at home now and recovering well after his ordeal, but as of yet, there have been no arrests. Quinn has repeatedly denied any part in the intimidation and harassment of the new bosses, and was anxious to do the same in relation to the abduction of Kevin Lunny. So, agreed to give us a rare television interview.
Did you know about or commission or sanction the abduction and torture of Kevin Lunny?
No, I didn't. I'd have no hand, act or part or no knowledge or no gain. I'd have no benefit from doing anything to Kevin Lunny. Kevin Lunny and I were good friends for years.
Sean Quinn is anxious to highlight the anger in some parts of the community about how he was treated by the new executives.
The locals are also very angry about what they've done to me, throwing me at the gate, giving me nothing, sacking me. They're very, very angry.
But do you genuinely think, Sean, that they're angry to the extent that they would set cars on fire, set factories on fire, and abduct and torture a man? Do you genuinely, in your heart of heart, think that is the calibre of the people that live around here?
I don't think so, no.
So where is it coming from?
Well, you tell me.
The Quinn Company story is turbulent, complicated, and Sean Quinn wasn't the only one to lose out. So did other local businesses over the years, and some of those had connections to both dangerous criminal networks and militant republicanism.
But I think somebody with a high IQ would know that Sean Quinn is not a real fool, and that he would know if something like what happened to Kevin Lunny happened, that people would be looking in his direction. Wouldn't I know that? So unless they consider me a real idiot, there's no way that I could allow that to be done in my name.
Quinn tells us that the Kevin Lunny affair has finally put paid to his ambitions to retake the throne.
You're a man that likes winning. Have you resigned yourself to the fact that you have lost this one?
Oh,
that
yeah.
It is over?
Oh, yeah, it's fine. It's no problem.
Are you sure you have?
I'm telling you that a month ago, I had still ambitions to go back into those offices and sort out Quinn Group.
A month ago?
A month ago, not today.
And what's changed in a month?
Kevin Lunny. Kevin Lunny.
We spoke to...
People can say whatever they want about me, but I don't want to be seen as being the beneficiary of abuse or of what criminal activity.
Whatever the reasons behind Kevin Lunny's abduction, it speaks to a criminal subculture that still exists in these parts. A subculture forged during the Troubles, connected to militant republicanism, alive and kicking along the Brexit border.
Warwick O'Brien reporting there.
The Westminster deadlock isn't helped by confusion. One key question, for example, being what kind of customs checks will now apply to goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The Brexit Secretary got into difficulties about that in front of a parliamentary committee on Monday, and in another hearing today, an opposition MP told the Home Secretary that the government didn't even know the answers to those questions. But loyalists in Northern Ireland have reached their own conclusion, and many are angry at the prospect of a new frontier on the Irish Sea. The disillusionment has sparked concerns for the police in Northern Ireland, a force which previously had warned of the risk of Republican disorder following speculation about the return of a possible hard land border. Peter Taylor, the veteran chronicler of the Troubles, spoke to the PSNI Chief Constable and has this report.
One part of the United Kingdom is central to the apparently endless Brexit debate, and that's Northern Ireland. To date, public attention has been largely focused on Westminster and its politicians, but that isn't the whole story. Brexit is as divisive here in Northern Ireland as it is in the rest of the United Kingdom, and nowhere more so than here on the Shankill Road, the citadel of loyalism, the citadel that has suffered so much. The fear is that a border in the middle of the Irish Sea is the thin end of the wedge of Irish unity. Do you fear a loyalist backlash?
I'm not saying we'd fear a loyalist backlash, because I don't think there's any evidence yet that we're at that point. I think we have to be open-minded, that this often here is my early reflections and learning is that violence in very different forms is a reflection of people's views of a threat to their identity. So that if the political resolution we get to, whether it's this week or beyond in the next few months, threatens the union, you can anticipate a lot of emotion in loyalist communities and the potential for civil disorder.
On Monday evening in Belfast, many unionists queued to express their anger and concerns over the government's New Deal. Those concerns are reflected by Billy Hutchinson, a former member of the UVF and now a Belfast City Councillor.
And the issue here is the principle of consent and about the Britishness of people in Belfast. And I've been saying this all week, Peter, there's confusion about this. And that confusion is that irrespective of what Brexit brings out, it's a question of, is Northern Ireland's position in the United Kingdom safe? And that's the most important bit.
However, there are prominent unionists like David Trimble, one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement, who support Boris Johnson's deal, as do other unionists.
Yesterday's agreement is a great step forward. Whilst previously the people of Northern Ireland were to have an agreement imposed on them, now we have a mechanism for the consent of the people of Northern Ireland. This is fully in accordance with the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement.
Down the years, maintaining and defending the union of Northern Ireland with the rest of the United Kingdom has been unionism's overriding concern. The Good Friday Agreement of 1998 enshrined the guarantee that Northern Ireland would remain part of the UK as long as the majority wished it. But now there are fears that the guarantee is less secure, given the Prime Minister's new Brexit deal, which many loyalists believe is tantamount to some kind of border in the Irish Sea.
We will have two different tariffs. We'll have a UK tariff and the EU tariff. And also about goods moving back and forward. And for Northern Ireland companies, this is going to be a nightmare. They'll have two sets of forms to fill in, and they'll be treated differently.
To unionists, the union flag is more than just a symbol. It's central to their very being.
From the loyalist community, I think we are concerned that identity is also important. We saw that a few years ago with serious disorder in relation to flags, and therefore how whatever ends up as a Brexit deal, if there is one, could be perceived in a way that sort of threatens the security of the loyalist community. And therefore sometimes when the narrative is all about what the dissident republics are going to do, our concern is also the loyalist community has at times shown it can mobilise quickly, bring large numbers of people onto the streets and engage in public disorder in support of their cause.
Recent history warns of the consequences of loyalist anger. In 2013, protests turned violent after the nationalist-dominated Belfast City Council restricted the number of days that the Union flag could be flown over City Hall. Dozens of police officers were injured. Are you prepared to deal with that eventuality of there being street demonstrations, possibly violent street demonstrations?
I think clearly we rely on being able to get police officers in sufficient numbers to quell disorder. So we also have arrangements with the rest of the United Kingdom that if we feel we need to draw into Great Britain and bring extra police officers here to support that endeavour, that we can.
At Monday night's meeting in Belfast, loyalists did not mince their words.
There was a clear message come out of it. The Unionist and Loyalist community have had enough of this one-sided peace process. We're not going to tolerate an economic United Ireland, and that was the feeling in the room. The anger is immense across unionism and loyalism.
The Chief Constable has previously expressed concern over the potential reaction of nationalist and Republicans to a hard border, but now he may have loyalists to deal with.
Peter Taylor there.
I've been getting away